Hello and welcome back to Best Medicine's AQA GCSE Biology lecture series. In this particular lecture, we'll be talking about respiration. Respiration is a process in which we use glucose to make energy. Now there's two different kinds of respiration. There's aerobic respiration that uses oxygen, and that would occur in the mitochondria. The other type of respiration is anaerobic respiration, and for that we have two different types. One of them is called lactic acid fermentation, and the other one is called alcoholic fermentation. Okay, so taking a look at cellular respiration for the first time. What is respiration? It is a process by which organisms make energy, okay, from food. So in respiration, energy is released. Because energy is being released, it is an exothermic reaction. Remember photosynthesis? Was it an exothermic or an endothermic reaction? Photosynthesis was an endothermic reaction, while respiration is the opposite. It is releasing energy, so it is an exothermic reaction. Now, respiration can either be aerobic, which means it uses oxygen, or anaerobic, without using oxygen, in the absence of oxygen. So what is the equation for aerobic respiration? Now, for the sake of AQA, you need to remember this equation. C6H12O6 plus oxygen gives you carbon dioxide plus water, plus obviously energy, which is not a reactant in this case. So if you want to balance this, we'll have to put 6 carbons here to balance the carbons, and then we'll have to put 6 for the hydrogens here, so that 12 hydrogens on each side, and then we can put a 6 here to have 18 oxygens on each side, and now it's balanced. And you're expected to know the balanced chemical equation for aerobic respiration, okay? And if you notice, this is the opposite to the equation for photosynthesis, because if you go down this way, that's photosynthesis, isn't it? And if you go down that way, that's respiration. Okay, so here's what occurs in respiration. Basically, remember you have cells, right? You have different cells making up different tissues in the body, like nervous tissue, muscle tissue, liver tissue, skin tissue, right? And so each of those cells would have nuclei, of course, right? Because we are eukaryotic organisms. And then on top of this, you will have mitochondria, right? So mitochondria is going on here. We have mitochondria. Now, what happens is that we get glucose. Where do we get glucose from? We get glucose from our food. Remember, we eat starch. Most of the time we eat starch. And starch is digested by amylase to make maltose. And then maltose will be digested by further carbohydrates like maltase to give us glucose. Glucose will be absorbed by the intestines, and then it's going to travel by the blood, right? So glucose is going to travel by the blood to tissues through capillaries, and it's going to go into our cells. And so once glucose comes here, that comes from our food. What about water? Water, we drink water, right? Water is also coming from the blood into the tissues. What about oxygen? Oxygen is going into what part of the blood? Oxygen is going into the red blood cells, binding to what pigment? Hemoglobin. So oxygen also, and most importantly, that's very, very important, comes into the cells. So all in all, we have many different things, right? Amino acids would be coming to the cells. Just like this. So we have so many things that are coming towards the cells. The ones that are being used is glucose from our food, right? And oxygen that we breathe. And that's going to come into the cell, and it's going to be used by the cell itself and the mitochondria to give us energy, okay? So, aerobic respiration in eukaryotic organisms, plants, animals, fungi, protists, occurs in the mitochondria. Now, comparatively, aerobic respiration releases a lot of energy per glucose molecule, okay? We want to know this because comparatively, and we want to know the differences between anaerobic and aerobic respiration, and one of the differences is going to be that it produces lesser energy, anaerobic respiration, while aerobic respiration produces more energy. Aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria. Anaerobic respiration would occur in the cytoplasm. And number 3, we have aerobic respiration is relatively slower than anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration is going to be very, very quick. Okay, so it would occur in this mitochondria. Here's a mitochondria just for reference. Remember when we were doing it in the very beginning, I told you it has a outer membrane which is smooth, right? Smooth outer membrane, and then a folded inner membrane. And that's how you differentiate between a chloroplast and a mitochondria. And a chloroplast kind of looks like this. It's got these stacks of chlorophyll, and that's really about it. Okay? All right. Eating food, but cellular respiration. Okay, what about anaerobic respiration? Anaerobic respiration, also called fermentation, is a kind of respiration in which we produce energy from glucose without using oxygen. Okay? Without using oxygen. Now, this can occur in humans. We have the capability to do anaerobic respiration. We actually do it many times. This can occur in humans, fungi, bacteria, and archaea. Now, anaerobic respiration would not occur in the mitochondria. It would occur in the cytoplasm, okay? It would occur in the cytoplasm, while aerobic respiration would occur in the mitochondria. Anaerobic respiration releases much lesser energy than aerobic respiration, and that is very important. So much lesser energy than aerobic respiration. And number 3, anaerobic respiration is relatively quicker, very, very quick actually. Quicker process than aerobic respiration. And so these are the 3 differences that you can remember in case a question on this shows up. And hopefully you guys can get full marks on this. Okay, biology professor mentions fermentation. The first thing that comes to mind, alcohol. Okay, well, basically, aerobic respiration can be divided into 2 types. Alcoholic fermentation, and the other one was lactic acid fermentation. We're going to come to that in a bit. So let's have a look at alcoholic fermentation. How does this work? Alcoholic fermentation works in this way that you have glucose, and that is covered anaerobically into ethanol, carbon dioxide, and water, plus some energy. Okay? So a little bit of energy is released in this process, keeping the organism that is doing this alive. Now, usually, the most popular example of the organism that you need to know in which alcoholic fermentation occurs is yeast. Okay? Yeast is fungi. So yeast is the most popular organism in which alcoholic fermentation would occur. So again, alcoholic fermentation includes glucose, and then gives you ethanol, that's quite important, and carbon dioxide, that's also very important, plus water. Now, one place where we use alcoholic fermentation is in winemaking industry. Okay, winemaking industry. How do we do this? Let me show you. So the way this would work is that you would have a bottle. Let's say here's a bottle, right? With a cork and everything, and then here's a wine bottle. And what you do is you put some grape juice or some sugar-containing juice, right? Flavored juice into it. And the next thing you do is that you add some yeast into it, okay? So once you add some yeast into it, now what's going to happen is the yeast is naturally start going to do anaerobic respiration. Another very important thing that you do is you close the top of the bottle, okay? So to make sure that there's no air that is entering into this bottle. So keeping this mixture together, you store it in a particular place and let the yeast ferment on the sugar. And over time, it would keep on producing ethanol, okay? C2H5OH. So as time passes, more and more ethanol is being produced, okay? And that's how they make wines. So again, used in winemaking industry. Method is to put some sugar solution, for example, grape juice, in a wine bottle, add some yeast into it, and then close it airtight and leave the yeast to do anaerobic respiration, ferment, right? So as the yeast ferments, it will make ethanol, and that is how wines are prepared. The other place where we can use alcoholic fermentation, and we use it almost every day around us, and that is in bread making industry. In bread making industry. Remember the equation for alcoholic fermentation? Do you? It is glucose, which gives ethanol, and carbon dioxide. We can use this to our advantage as well, right? So it's not just ethanol that is being produced, but carbon dioxide as well, plus water. Now, we can use carbon dioxide to be able to make bread. to give the bread the fluffy texture that it has. So how do we do this? Here's what we do. We add some yeast to the dough as we're kneading it. Okay? So here's a person kneading the dough, and they're adding the yeast into it. So once the yeast is added, then we let it ferment for a few hours. Okay, so we just let it sit. Now what's going to happen here is that little bubbles, as the yeast ferments, little bubbles, very small bubbles, right, of CO2 will be produced and trapped in this. Okay? So carbon dioxide is produced and trapped into the bread, into the dough. The next thing we do is we bake this. So when we bake this, what's going to happen is that the gas gets heated. As the gas, CO2, gets heated, its kinetic energy is going to increase. So if the kinetic energy of the gas increases, does it expand or contract? Of course, it will expand. So as it expands, right, it's going to cause the dough to have those little bubbles inside, the fluffy texture on the inside. So here's how it would look like after baking, right? These holes are due to the result of CO2 expansion, that we see here. And that is why we have the fluffy texture of a baked bread, okay? And next up, we have lactic acid fermentation. So the other type of anaerobic respiration is lactic acid fermentation. We'll do more on this later, but I want you to understand that when oxygen is scarce, then and the energy is high in demand, then not only can our muscles increase the aerobic respiration, but also switch to a little bit of lactic acid fermentation. So if you have maxed out on mitochondria, you can also make a little bit of anaerobic respiration energy, lactic acid fermentation energy. So it makes small amounts of energy on top of the energy that it's producing using the mitochondria, okay? And we'll cover more on this later. But why do organisms need energy? This is a very popular question, and a couple of my students, they were not able to get, let's say, a 4-mark question, right? Maybe they were able to get 3 marks onto this. So before I even taught them this. So I want you guys to get full marks. So I mentioned the list here, at least 5 points that you can mention so that you can get this question right every time. So why do organisms need energy? Well, 4 marks question, right? Well, one of them would be active transport, remember, of glucose and amino acids in the intestines, and mineral ions in the root hair cells. So active transport. Number 2, muscle contractions for movement. Number 3, cell division and growth. Number 4, for making proteins, such as receptors and enzymes and all those things. So remember, proteins are made when DNA gives out a template that goes to the ribosomes, and the ribosomes reads off that template, links the amino acids together, and gives you a protein. And number 5, to regulate internal body temperature and produce body heat. Okay? And then we can also write a couple of extra points there. Now, remember I said that lactic acid fermentation occurs when the oxygen is scarce, right? And our muscles are moving and intensely exercising, and there's very less oxygen, or oxygen is not sufficient enough to be able to meet all the energy demands. So we also, on top of the aerobic respiration, we also do a little bit of anaerobic respiration to produce that extra little bit of energy. Now, that would occur in the muscles, right? So we need to have a little bit of a background on the muscles. Let's have a look at muscles. So muscles, remember, there are 3 kinds of muscles in the body. We've already done this. Skeletal muscles. These are muscles that are voluntary and help us move. For example, biceps and triceps and quads and hamstrings, right? And cardiac muscle. These are the ones that make the heart. And smooth muscles, which are involuntary muscles in the gastrointestinal tract, also in the in the iris, not the retina, in the iris, for pupillary dilation and constriction. Now, here's the thing: muscles, they contain contractile proteins. Okay, so inside a muscle cell, you have these proteins that help the muscle cell to contract and relax. A little bit of how it works is that you have a muscle cell, let's say, here's a skeletal muscle fiber, and inside of this, it's got these long protein fibers, okay, inside of them. And then these protein fibers are able to hold on to each other and pull each other making the cell contract. So if they pull onto each other this way, it's going to make the cell contract and shorter. And if they relax, so the cell will become something like this, right? And if they relax, then the cell will go back to normal, and so on. So these contractile proteins, they need energy to be able to do these contractions. So the muscle cells, they contain many mitochondria to supply them with energy. They also store glycogen, which can be broken down into glucose for energy. Remember glycogen? When we were doing biological molecules, we said that one type of polysaccharide, the storage form of glucose in animals, is glycogen. So glycogen would also be stored here. Not only are you going to have a lot of mitochondria, which we can draw here, maybe this is a mitochondria, right? All of these are mitochondria. And on top of this, you'll have some stores of glycogen going on. So a little bit of glycogen here, like glycogen there, and so on. Okay? Now, when we start exercising, these proteins are contracting and relaxing all the time, right? The rate of contraction and relaxation would increase. This means that the demand on energy would also increase. So if demand on energy increases, the rate of aerobic respiration will increase. To facilitate the increase in the rate of aerobic respiration, which needs oxygen, right? Human body undergoes a couple of responses. The human body's response to exercise would be to increase the heart rate. Why would we want to increase the heart rate? We increase the heart rate because as the rate of aerobic respiration increases, we need to have more oxygen going to the muscles. On top of this, we want also to remove the waste products. So more blood and therefore more oxygen and glucose can be pumped into muscles for making energy and taking away waste products. On top of this, breathing rate is going to increase. Why does the breathing rate increase? Because we want to remove carbon dioxide and get more oxygen in the blood, right? Remove CO2 to exhale it and inhale the oxygen. And yeah, so here's a meme. Lungs breathes in oxygen. Carbon dioxide. Okay, it's leaving. Glycogen breakdown increases, of course, because as you are respiring aerobically, you're using a lot of glucose. So you want to convert this glycogen very, very quickly back to glucose. That glucose can be used for aerobic respiration. However, what if, and that brings us to our topic of lactic acid fermentation, what if we were to exercise so intensely that there wasn't enough oxygen to meet all the energy demands, right? So we're exercising so intensely that all the oxygen that we're breathing is being used and we still need more energy, right? Then what do? Well, then our body has the ability to switch to anaerobic respiration on top of it, okay? So you're meeting as much as you can with aerobic respiration, but on top of it, you're also switching to anaerobic respiration. The kind of anaerobic respiration that would occur in muscles to supply highly intense workouts is called lactic acid fermentation. Okay, lactic acid fermentation. This kind of anaerobic respiration would produce small amounts of very quick energy because we very quickly and desperately need energy. So it will produce small amounts because it's anaerobic and very quick energy. And this will be made in the absence of oxygen outside the mitochondria. However, there's a catch to this. Lactic acid is also produced. Okay? So basically what I'm saying is that you have glucose, right? And glucose is going into lactic acid plus energy. And that's all there is to it. So you're getting this very quick energy, very quick and a little bit of energy to supply that extra demand that you have at that particular stressful situation. But there's a catch. You're producing lactic acid. Lactic acid is not good because you're producing it in muscles, and this is an acid. It's going to build up in the muscles. And as it builds up, it's going to cause pain, it's going to cause burning sensations, cramps, right? And muscle fatigue. So it's not very good to have a lot of lactic acid in your muscles. So lactic acid causes muscle cramps, aches, and fatigue. And so we want to remove this lactic acid as soon as we have the chance. So what do? Well, after the period of intense exercise ends, then what's going to happen is that all of this lactic acid is going to be transported through the blood into the liver, and the liver will recycle it, okay? And the liver will recycle it back to glucose. So here's what I mean by this. That you have a muscle, right? And remember, this muscle was undergoing intense exercise. So what this muscle is producing on top of CO2 and water is lactic acid. So because it's got this lactic acid, it has muscle fatigue, cramps, and pain. Do you know what muscle fatigue is? Let me show you. Muscle fatigue is the decline in ability of a muscle to generate force due to prolonged activity or accumulation of lactic acid. Okay? That is muscle fatigue. So, we have this fatigued muscle. Now, the period of exercise has ended. What do we do now? Now the oxygen is available. So oxygen earlier was not available, but now oxygen is available. So what do? Well, we take this lactic acid through blood. So here's a blood vessel, and that's going to take the lactic acid to the liver. Okay? To the liver. And so this lactic acid is going to go into the blood. Through the blood, it's going to go into the liver. What does the liver do? The liver converts this lactic acid using oxygen back to glucose. Okay? Back to glucose. So what have we really done here? What we've really done is that we didn't have oxygen, and we took kind of like a depth, right? A depth of energy. We said that when oxygen becomes available again, we'll pay it back, right? And that's what we did over here. It's kind of like taking an oxygen debt, that you don't have oxygen and you want to make energy, so you very quickly borrow some energy and take the oxygen debt, so that when oxygen gets available again, you pay off the oxygen and convert the lactic acid back to glucose. So this phenomena is known as the oxygen debt. Now let me repeat this from the very beginning once again. So basically, when you're exercising so intensely that your aerobic respiration energy is not able to meet all of your demands, then your body also switches to anaerobic respiration. So on top of the oxygen, on top of the aerobic respiration, you have anaerobic respiration, which does not use oxygen because you do not have sufficient oxygen. So what you do essentially is you take an oxygen debt, making lactic acid in the process. Okay, and that's the catch there. Lactic acid is not good for us. So we need to recycle it, and to be able to recycle it, we'll need to pay off the oxygen. So we take this oxygen debt, making lactic acid in the process, and then after oxygen becomes available again, after we stop exercising, then lactic acid is transferred to the liver, and using oxygen, it is converted back to glucose. So we pay off the debt. And this is called oxygen debt. So let's have a look in your neat notes. Again, here's the muscles, right? And the muscles are making lactic acid. And it's going to go into the liver through the blood vessels, and the liver is going to use the oxygen from the hemoglobin to be able to convert this back to glucose. And that is called paying off the oxygen debt. So after the exercise period ends, lactic acid is slowly recycled by the blood to the liver. In the liver, oxygen is used to convert the lactic acid back into glucose. This process is slow, so muscle fatigue goes away slowly. It is kind of like taking a debt, right? Such that oxygen isn't available, but we really need energy, so we borrow help from lactic acid fermentation. But then, when oxygen becomes available again, we pay off the debt in the liver. So, this phenomena is called oxygen debt recycling, okay? And that covers this particular portion on oxygen debt. Here's a meme for you. Poor people when they discover that there's such thing as oxygen debt. Again, oxygen debt is the extra oxygen required after exercise to metabolize accumulated lactic acid back into glucose by the liver, okay? And restore the body to its resting state. When you run to pay off your loans, but now you're in oxygen debt. Do you guys understand this? Because you're running so intensely your muscle switched to lactic acid fermentation, and now you got to pay off that oxygen debt to recycle the lactic acid. Metabolic reactions. Metabolic reactions are the sum of all reactions in which materials are built up, for example, anabolic reactions, and where materials are broken down, catabolic reactions. So if we're digesting proteins, right, into amino acids, well, we're breaking things down, and that is catabolism. While making proteins form amino acids, so we're building stuff up, that is anabolism, right? Anabolic reactions. Now, together, both catabolism and anabolism combined would mean metabolism. So all chemical reactions in the body are termed together as metabolic reactions. Now, liver is a very important organ, and I've seen a question on this in which they try to tell you, try to ask from you, what is the function of the liver? Literally, just directly, right? And I saw a question in which they gave 4 marks. And one of my newer students, I asked them before I taught them this. I asked them if it was possible to tell me at least 4 functions of the liver, right? And many of them were not able to do so. So I have put this here specifically in its own portion so that you guys can get full marks every time you see this, okay? You're happy when you see this question. So what is the role of the liver in the human body? Well, number one, and we have been doing this for a very long time, it has that extra vein, right? That vein that connects the liver to the small intestines. That makes a portal between the small intestines and the liver, and that's called a portal vein. And the portal vein is there for a reason. It is so that all the absorbed food first goes into the liver, so that it needs to be checked, right? So that it can be checked, any drugs, any toxins can be neutralized, detoxified by the liver. So that is the first function of the liver. Number 2 that we just did is the recycling of lactic acid. Using what? Using oxygen. Paying off what? Paying off oxygen debt. Right? Easy. So that's 2 functions. The third function of the liver is that it is able to break down excess amino acids. Remember, we eat proteins, right? And then proteins are digested into amino acids by what enzymes? Proteases and peptidases. So proteases and peptidases, they will break down the proteins into amino acids. Now let's say we eat a lot of proteins, right? If we eat excess proteins, then we're going to have excess of amino acids. So if we have too many amino acids, then they can be broken down by the liver, right? More than we need, then they will be taken to the liver, and the liver will break them down into glucose plus urea. Urea is a waste product that is made in the process of breaking down excess amino acids, and that is done by the liver. So that's the third function, okay? This process, by the way, is called deamination. Amination comes from amino acid, right? Amino acid, amination. So deamination is the process by which amino acids are converted into glucose and urea. Excess amino acids are broken down. The fourth function of liver is very important, and that is that it stores a lot of glycogen, okay? A lot of excess glucose is stored in the liver. Actually, it is targeted by the hormone that helps store glucose, helps reduce blood sugar, and that is insulin. So basically, insulin, which we'll do later in its own chapter as well, comes in, stimulates the liver to convert the glucose into glycogen. So here's what the liver does. It converts glucose into glycogen and stores it, okay, inside the liver. So one of the major organs that is targeted by insulin is the liver. The other is the muscles. And so these are the 4, at least, four major functions of the liver. Again, detoxification of toxins, recycling of lactic acid, breaking down of excess amino acids by deamination, and storing glucose as glycogen. Now, two other functions that I've mentioned just in case, or in case you forget one of these, is liver makes bile. Remember, liver makes bile, right? Which is stored in the gallbladder and then released into the small intestines to help in digestion of fats. And number 6, liver helps break down old red blood cells as well. Okay, but I would go with the first 4 for your 4-mark answer, and then if you don't remember any of these, maybe you can add this one. Okay. So liver is working all the time, right? It has so many functions. It is working all the time. So here's the liver being all mad and cranky. I hope you have fun, right? Well, some of us have to work overtime. Very, very tired and cranky, and hasn't slept much, it seems. Okay, liver can get damaged. How can the liver get damaged? Well, it can get damaged by excessive alcohol consumption. Remember, alcohol is a toxin, and it goes through the portal vein into the liver to be detoxified. So if you're taking a lot of alcohol, then that's going to damage the liver. On top of this, you have the hepatitis viruses. Okay, you don't need to know this for the sake of GCSEs, the viruses part, but hepatitis viruses, anything hepatic is liver. Remember, hepatic artery and hepatic vein. So hepatitis viruses actually infect the liver and cause very severe liver diseases. Now, as it gets damaged, it results in a replacement of normal liver tissue into a fibrous tissue, which is non-functional. It's just a couple of proteins that are fibrous. This condition is called liver cirrhosis, and liver cirrhosis is very bad. Usually it's slow, but sometimes it can be very fast as well. So liver cirrhosis or liver fibrosis is irreversible, right? It can result in liver failure and death. It also increases risk of developing cancer. And anyone who gets liver failure, they have to get a liver transplant. Otherwise, it's not treatable. Okay. Here's my liver listening to me tell my doctor that I don't drink that often. You see, you understand the point? It's very rigid right now, right? Very fibrous. So all of this is cirrhosis. It has become, instead of being squishy and soft, it has gone into this very thick and rigid fibrous tissue. Okay, here's an extra question for you guys. See if you can answer this in the comments. Who can label these 3 muscles? It's not part of AQA, but you can try, okay? So these 3 muscles, which one of these, which of the, just match the numbers for their names, okay? And yeah, that's it for this particular chapter. So if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments, and you can buy these notes by contacting through the WhatsApp link provided below. If you want to purchase these notes, or you want to get private coaching for your specific needs, then you can contact us right now using the WhatsApp link below, okay? Have a good one. I'll see you in the next one.